Okay, so this video is about our latest indicator, that is number 12. We call it the bimodal um, model. And the reason we call it like this is because if you use the power law, right? So to us, the power law is the reference for everything we do. So if you use the power law as your reference and you subtract the trend from the power law, yeah, the differences, right? The percent differences from the power law will form a certain distribution. But basically, this is the graph that I'm showing you. What is the interpretation of this graph? Is that basically in the y-axis we see how many counts, right? You can do it over a certain period of time, maybe a few months or so on. So when you count how many of these prices are in a certain range relatively to the power law. The main way to reveal this pattern is um, the fact that we account for the decay over time of the volatility of Bitcoin. So the volatility means basically the how big the changes are from a certain average, right? In the early days, used to be that Bitcoin will change a lot from day to day, and this is decaying over time. It's not just the decay of the bubbles that is going down over time, but also the general uh, volatility of Bitcoin itself. And that volatility is also different. So, first of all, we account for that. And so, to account for that, we basically take these changes from the price, and then we divide it. This is what volatility adjusted means, is by the volatility. And so, in that way, you have a much more uniform behavior across the history of Bitcoin. One of the way to see this is this one, right? Basically, what I did here, I took all these changes from the trend, and then I divided them by, you can do it by the price or by the volatility. It's basically the same thing, very similar. And then what you see basically like kind of two regimes, right? There is a, and the other thing that I did here, I also randomize the order of these data points. I did it in this way to see independently of the cycles, right, of a precise pattern we see during the cycle. Is there something that we can learn from the distribution, from how the different changes happen relatively to each other? And you can see there are two regimes, and of course, these two regimes you can verify if you introduce again the precise timing of these events. But there are two regimes. There is one regime that is the upper one, that is when Bitcoin is above zero. Zero in this case means the power law, right? So if we are above the power law, the general trend of the power law, or if we are below the power law. And these are the what we call the bubbles when we are above, and what we call the the bear market. It's not really the bear market because we still go up according to the power law. It is pretty fast motion up, but it looks bearish relatively to the bull here. Right, we have one single bull here, then we have a bear market, and so. But there are basically two regimes: one above the power law and one below. The one above the power law even includes when we go down from the peak until basically we cross the middle power law, and then we go to the region between a support line and the middle power law. Okay, we will see all these in when we show the how the indicator looks like. Right now, we are trying to give you like a background, right? What is the background of the theoretical ideas behind the indicator? And so you see, there are these very narrow regions. So when people think that the power law is not precise, they don't know what they're talking about. The red line is kind of an average for the upper region and the one above, red one above, and then The red one below is is the middle for when we are below the power law. And I draw here other line that represents different amount of deviations, like one deviation above the power law, one deviation below, and you can see that standard deviations basically. Um, you can see that by the time you go to standard deviation, you have basically almost all the points contained in this very narrow region. But it will be many people are confused because they think, well, the power law says we can go from this price all the way. They are thinking that is the entire range that is covered by from the support line all the way up to the upper, the big tops that we observe during bull markets. But that is not the case because there are these very distinctive regimes where the price is contained in a very narrow region according to a particular regime. And again, this is illustrated by this diagram where basically you have these beans, right? So I'm counting how many events in a certain range, and this range, that is in the x-axis, is defined in terms of this normalized deviation, right? So I corrected in terms of the decay, so they are much more uniform across the history of Bitcoin. And then I can see there is a clear bimodal behavior, right? There is a behavior that is relevant for, I would call it bear, but it's basically when we are below the power law, and one when we are above the power law. So this is the theory. Let's go and check um, what we have when we look at the indicator itself. So here we have the indicator itself, right? It is based on all these theoretical ideas that I just explained before, and you can see here clearly the two regions, right? So there is the blue line. Let me go through the indicator, what it does, and how to interpret it and how to use it. So basically, the first thing you notice, there is this blue line. The blue line represents the typical power law that we talk about, right? We unfortunately, as we mentioned many times, TradingView doesn't have a way to show the log of x-axis. In theory, you could do it, but it requires some creating like a special axis, etc. Eventually, we will have an indicator like that, but right now we are doing all the calculations for the power law and in what is called a log linear chart, where we take the log of the y-axis and we have a linear x-axis. It will look like a curve, right? But it's a straight line in a. If we could take also the log of time. And so that is the blue line, the typical power law that we always mention. Then we have a white line, it is the what we call the support line. That it can be calculated in many different ways using more sophisticated method like quantile or maybe ransack, that eliminates or gives less weight to outliers. But it's also, it turns out that you can calculate it by taking like 60% deviation from the trend. And that line represents a place where we can find a historical bottom for Bitcoin. And also, it has never been violated for some reason, right? Even during COVID, that is this event here. And we think that has to do something with the cost of production of Bitcoin. We don't have yet a formal demonstration of that, but there is a lot of evidence that is probably linked with the cost of production of Bitcoin. And this is why it's such a powerful support. And also, it's not something that some arbitrary person draw, but it's actually a mathematical equation, and this has some physical meaning behind it. And then this graph, you can see has two colored regions. So it's dividing like we did before, like during the theoretical discussion, the data points in two regions, below and above the power law. Now, if we could do it in a more sophisticated way, we actually use what is called a hidden Markov model to separate the two groups of data points. But really, it simplifies in this way: whatever is below and whatever is above the power law, the middle one. Notice that we don't spend a lot of time on the blue line. Most of the time we spend it above or below, right? On the blue line, there are only few days where we spend on the blue line. But it's okay because that blue line, it's a compromise between these two regimes. So it's a good reference point. Um, Now, the way this uh, indicator is created is by taking all the data points below the power law, and then we calculate like a total average up to whatever point we are looking at. And that average for the points below the power law is that dark green line, this line here, the dark green line. That is the real power law in a sense that is associated with this region of the data that is below the reference power law. And you notice, right, it's basically parallel to the line above. It's a straight line, kind of just follows the blue line, but it's below, right? And that means that um, really the blue line, besides being a compromise, is not really the real power law. The real power law is the one below, that is the dark line. And the deviation from that line tells you how likely is that we have this particular price that define the deviation. So the darker regions are the regions where it's mostly unlikely, according to the distribution that I showed you before, that the price should find itself, right? So what does it mean in practice? In practice means that if you are behind these colored regions, very likely the price will correct towards the dark green line. And you can see here, for example, the bottom. So you have the support that also confirms is an additional signal that we will probably not go down below that, but also given that we are very far away from the real trend, that should be the dark green line, there will be a correction. And you can see there is a correction. And the correction is towards the green line. So it's going up, right? We are below it, we're going up. And same thing when we are too far away in the other direction, like what happened in March, mostly due to the ETFs. We were going away, so multiple signal. We touched the power law. That also was an additional signal, but we were also very far away from the middle power law, right, from the dark green power law, because that was the correct regime, right? Now you have all the other indicators to tell you, beside the signal being above or below, that also we enter the new, a bubble, etc. So this is, as all our indicators should be used together with the other indicators. So by the other indicator that the bull market starts and so on. So if it turns out like here, during March when we kind of were testing going slightly above the power law, right? This is why these indicators started to get this red regions area. You knew that it was not supposed to be there, right? Because during this time, we are supposed to be in the green area. And so the price corrected, right, until it went back to the green area. Then, of course, there is a transition region. We say that by November, the bull market will start. And when the bull market starts, we transition, right? We can eventually, we improve all the time our charts. We can color yellow maybe the transition region, so when we are supposed to actually transition from one region to another. So with transition we went above, and right now, because the bull market is supposed to have started already, even if right now we are kind of following the power law, we are supposed to do much better than the power law. We are supposed to grow faster than the power law during this time. It means that maybe something will happen later. We are still waiting to go up. But right now we are in this other region. So the dark red line is the new power law, is the power law that is our reference. So you can see what happened here during the last bull market. This red upper region uh, is where we are supposed to be during this time, and the dark line is the average. It's this continuous cumulative average, if you want. And same thing like below, that shaded area represent the volatility. They represent the local volatility. You calculate it over a certain window. Now you have many different options where you can uh, click here on the bolt. Then you can decide how big your volatility window is. Right now we are using 90 days, and you can experiment with it, right? You can see, okay, what happens if I make my volatility windows longer? So instead of 90 days I make it 120, right? So what will happen is that um, you will have maybe more um, smoother um, regions, but they don't respond very well to local changes, right? So it's going to be a compromise between um, getting smoother changes versus standard deviation window. So actually, the most relevant parameter is this standard deviation window, right? So let's see if we make it longer, like we make it 250 days. Let's see what happens. Okay, you see, they became more stable, and they allow for bigger changes because now you have more variability included, but they are less responsive to local changes, right? So it depends on what you want to identify, what is your goal, and you can play around until you get something that it's according to what you're trying to achieve. I think a good compromise is 120. This is why we have it at 120, but it allows for being more local or more global. Depends on what you're looking for. So if I make it like this, it's 250. It allows for deviation up to actually the bottom here, right? Um, and so if we work with this, like for example, uh, then the idea behind it is when we are in the bull market, the bubbles themselves and the peaks themselves can be explained in terms of a local volatility. So it's simply that when we reach the top, it's basically two standard deviation within that range of whatever we are using, that window that we are ever using. It's not an impossible value, it's just something that is represented by a large deviation from the trend. So that is another interpretation of what these bubbles are. It's simply the general trend, that is the power law trend, plus additional volatility that is much larger during the bubbles than when we are below the power law. So when we are above the power law, we tend to have an overall shift because we have this transition towards the bull market. The price goes up, and then we kind of stabilize there. We continue to follow the power law trend, right? Because if a power law trend is valid over the entire history of Bitcoin, it has to be present all the time, right? We say many times, it looks like the bubble cancel. We leave it support when we go back. But another interpretation is that the power law trend is always there, and the bubbles are nothing else than the power law trend plus additional volatility that creates the bubbles, right? And then there is a correction from these distortions because you are not supposed to be there. It's too far away from the power law. Then there is a correction, and we go back to the power law. And then there is this switch, right? So and there is you can think about it as a even stronger correction. See how sharp these corrections are. And so by the time we reach the power law, we switch to this other mode where kind of almost overcompensate, and we go back to this regime, which is the regime is now all the way to the support. Maybe we reach the support, but it's like an extreme deviation, and then we go back to this regime, that is what we have for about 2 years below the power law. So if this model is correct, then we continuously switch between these two modes. We have 2 years below the power law and 2 years above the power law. right now we are supposed to be above a power law. We'll see, we will monitor, right? But we are in this kind of phase where we didn't cross yet the red line, the dark red line, and we kind of follow the power law right now, um, without going towards this very, very extreme volatility. We don't have extreme volatility yet. Maybe it's something that we'll experience later in the cycle. So, but this is a very cool model. I think it catches a lot of the behavior of Bitcoin. We will have to see if it continues to persist in the future, if this bimodal behavior persists in the future. But this is how you use this model. It allows you to identify the regions, when we are in a bullish region, where we're just moving along the power law, the transitions. Later, we can add yellow to identify where the transitions are. And then you can tell, right, where to expect the bubbles, because basically by the time, if you see a price, right, it goes far away in these dark regions, the price goes over the dark region, then it's time for a correction. Usually where the deviations don't go beyond the darkest region in the red area. Same with the green. All right. Hopefully you found this interesting and useful, and you can ask questions in the video, um, in the comments below. Thank you so much.